10 minutes under the normal schedule. I have a press conference. I have to step out for 30 minutes, but the committee can continue to deliberate if you would like. As we've gone today, I think we've done a pretty good job of closing out the items that we had, but we do have some free time here. If anybody has anything you'd like to talk about or raise or discuss. All right, Bo.
Yeah. You know, we have done a lot, I think, to come up with scenarios that involve technical aspects, because that's what we are good at, and we enjoy that. You know, we are guys that spend many years in the aerospace business. What I feel like we could do perhaps more in try to help NASA, look at how NASA does business in America and see if we can, you know, be helpful in that arena. And I was sitting there thinking a little earlier, and I'm thinking, we have our chairman who is an icon in business world. You know, I'm not trying to kiss up to you, Norm, but seriously. And I think under this gentleman's leadership, we ought to try to look at things that we ought to suggest to NASA to be more effective. In other words, okay, we are trying to figure out how to make technical content that fits the budget. There are two other areas. We haven't really talked a lot how to help NASA get more budget. And the third one is how to help NASA use budget they get more effectively. And I feel like there is probably some room for, you know, for a little dialogue, and I still count on your leadership in that area. You know this stuff. We are a bunch of, you know, technical people here. Yeah.
I'm an engineer that descended into management. No, but your point is a very good one, and you know, in the chapter we've talked about in our report, I think we will want to make some comments along those lines that I think there are some lessons that perhaps we could make a contribution and should. I know Jeff has got some thoughts, who's lived in this world as well. So I welcome the idea.
When my friend Jeff was talking earlier, he had one page on I think new way of doing business. And I had some discussion, you know, prior to our meeting here with some of the previous NASA managers, and I asked that question: how NASA could be a little more effective in getting better value for the dollars they do have, and things like there came some of the suggestions went along the lines that NASA has this traditional way of buying things from contractors, putting in big chunks, go through the competitive procurement. Contractors work very hard to compete. They award the contractors the work, and then contractors stays in the business for decades. And in some cases, maybe that's the only way to do it. Continuity of experience, of honing your skills. But there are pieces of NASA engagement, I believe, that could be treated a little differently, put them in smaller pieces, and provide something more of the continuous, not the periodic, but continuous competitive atmosphere. Just like, you know, when you go to a grocery store, you can buy 10 brands of milk. That to me is a continuous competition. And maybe this is easy to talk and harder to do, but I feel like we ought to try to at least maybe put something in our report that has to do, how could NASA in some cases do to get, number one, better value, and number two, stimulate newcomers, guys who come and make milk, you know, in our business, you know. So I don't know if anybody else thought of this idea, or am I a lonely wolf here on this committee, you know.
I obviously couldn't agree more. I've asked that question before. I am always told, you know, we can't possibly afford to have, we can barely afford to have one competitor doing something. We certainly can't afford to have two. And then you watch the problems and the overruns, and you go, you couldn't afford not to have two. If you had two, you would have wanted to spend less money than if you had the one. But of course, you can't do that, as Bo alludes to, if your idea of the competition is who gets the next $100 billion 10-year program. You have to break it down into smaller pieces. And I think one of the really key aspects to some of the technical ideas I talked about earlier is not that they're technically neat in and of themselves, but that they allow, a disaggregation of the requirements so that you can break up the individual pieces so that they're more competition friendly.
Ed, I saw you had a comment.
Yes, sorry. I do. I actually had an idea that came about during Senator Nelson's comments. And I should preface this for the people out there in blogosphere who are checking my credentials that, at one point I was both educated in Leningrad and a lecturer in Moscow at the Aviation Institute. But I was listening to the comments from Senator Nelson about funding the provision of launch services in the interim on the Russian launch system, which I have nothing but the greatest admiration from, but it is basically paying another government for a service that Americans might otherwise provide. And it occurred to me that this is one of those rare instances, Norm, where the American government can actually do an IRR calculation and say, what fraction of this payment that we know we will likely have to make to a foreign government could we invest in American industry to provide a capability sooner so that we don't have to make the payment to a foreign government? I mean, it's actually a relatively simple business case to think about, and it makes you realize that if you accept the fact that we're going to have a gap, which is almost inevitable of some duration, it's just the argument about what the duration is, you can actually estimate how much we would have to pay and what fraction of that it made sense to reinvest in Americans producing the capability. And it's actually a fairly simple argument that closes. So we might want to consider that.
I agree, and I... And if, as I suspect, the answer may not be overwhelming, but it comes out close, you have to factor in the fact that, close, it's obvious which way ties break in that calculus.
Close goes to the runner.
Our chair sends his apologies, but he did have to step out to meet with the media and to answer questions. So we'd all rather be here than there, as it turns out. But we're free to continue the discussion if there's some other comments that you'd like to offer.
So we have a little more time?
A little more time, yeah, Bo, go ahead.
Well, I want to raise a question as to whether we want to raise a question. Are you our chair in absentia here?
I was left with the cattle prod to
All
herd
right. So I'm ready to cower here. But, we have this giant trade space of n dimensions, each of which has y options in it, all of which we have to somehow combine over the next week. And do we want to sleep on that before we talk about it? Or are there any elements of it that we want to talk about now so as to focus our work between now and then more narrowly?
Well, I guess I would speak, personally, that we've had a deluge of info today. Most people will need to go back and probably review some of the charts, process a little bit. But I think if there are questions that we think need to be answered, it would be great if we could raise those now so that we could sort of get some help on getting those questions. So when we get back together next week, it's not the search for additional data. Yeah.
No, I
Chris?
just need time to think about it.
I think Bo was ahead of you. Bo, did you?
No, go ahead, Chris. I'll yell.
Somewhat relevant to that, I think it's relevant to that, and also I've been struck, as a committee, we get to sit back and pretty much criticize everybody, and maybe a little bit of self-criticism is useful too. Today, we emphasized the fix that the program is in with respect to budget. So much less in the current budget than was budgeted circa 2006, plus if you extend station, another 10 to 14 billion. And then what we went and did today was to say, and you know what? NASA should also have a robust advanced technology program. And you know what? NASA should also develop depots. And I think, if I was trying to put the best face on it, I think that would be that we would try to justify that by saying that we are in a fix. And if we want somehow to break out of NASA's chronic problem of not having enough money to do operations and developments simultaneously, there have to be some game changers, and the advanced technology and the depots are ways of trying to change the game. And nevertheless, when we try to incorporate this into our report, I think we ought to try, just as I berated Washington by saying that, you know, we're going to have to be honest about how much our budget can buy, we ought to be really upfront in our report as well and saying just how much a hit these different technology development items are going to represent, you know, to the extent we can estimate that, and factor that in, you know, as we think through the budget. We don't want to be guilty of just hanging more baubles on the Christmas tree, doing exactly what we say needs to be
Couldn't
avoided.
agree more. You know, well, the chart said it has to be a funded technology program, and that means we got to think about how fast we want to do it. We have to put a line item on that, and we have to figure out what we're going to beg for or what we're going to cut to get it.
But Chris, I couldn't agree more. I think the reality is that we have an administration that is interested in technology investment. And the ironic part is that, as you know, in the last few months, they've made several decisions about giving additional resources for technology development to the agencies that they consider to be technology developers. And on that list is the NIH and the NSF and the DOE, and not NASA. NASA has not been a beneficiary of the additional funding in the stimulus packages and others that are associated with new technology investments. And the perception is that the current technology program within NASA is such a direct, is a supporting technology program for human spaceflight, for short-term needs of human spaceflight, and therefore doesn't count in that category. And I think that along with this, you know, we need the vision and the request in this one. We need the vision of what the technology program would be in NASA that would, as Les, whose seat I'm in, pointed out this morning, would not only provide technology for NASA's missions, but as Jeff points out, provide the role that the NACA did for many years, is being a technology engine for a commercial space industry. And by the way, if it also helps with human health and other issues in the traditional spin-off model, that's fine. I think we have to help NASA craft that vision and make it a part of the package we carry forward.
Why don't we give Bo the last word here?
Well, yeah, I'm still along the line of this. I think NASA has an opportunity today to maybe not create, because it creates by itself, the vibrant commercial space industry. We have visited, you know, guys who spend their own money to get to space, to create an industry. NASA could help that, you know. NASA, we asked some people, I won't mention names, I guess, because maybe there was somewhat proprietary information, but we asked the questions, you know, how important was NASA business to you succeeding in commercial space? And the answer was very important. NASA can be a catalyst, you know, to grow and expand commercial space industry if it becomes one of their objectives. You know, you have to accomplish things what you want to do. It happens in spite of you. You have to actually want to do it. But I think if NASA could do that, and I don't think we are talking about a big portion of NASA's budget, I think it would elevate NASA in the eyes of every small businessman. People whose buddies are trying to get in the business, who talk up NASA, and I think there would be a positive image, NASA creating a new aerospace industry and assisting it in being successful. And I don't know that we have really come up with some concrete recommendation for NASA how to do that. We may have to talk some more about it, but I think it's very important. Well, thank you, whoever thought of this. Who's on my side?
You've got one lone person on your side, Will. That's great. Jeff, you want to wrap us?
Yeah, there's two thoughts that during the course of the last couple of days I've mentioned to other committee members, and I want to take these minutes to surface them for everybody else to think about, not to try to reach an answer. The first one of them I want to raise is, now that we have come to this point of realizing how critical propellant transfer initially and maybe depots later can be to the exploration architecture. And now that at least I personally am getting more interested in a mid-range booster as being a piece of that. A question that was previously didn't make sense to ask floats up. And that question is ISS the depot? Or, it certainly is a very logical place to do flight demonstration of technology maturation. But as we've listened to the concerns about propellant transfer architectures, one of the concerns that comes up is, well, it's not just propellant, you got all these pieces on orbit, their orbits have to be maintained, they need keep alive power. If you are really smart, you might want to launch the Earth departure stage last because it's kind of the big piece, but then you'd have to have the crew up ahead of time. You can't have the crew waiting around in orbit. And I'm listening to these pieces going, okay, I know ISS is kind of in the wrong orbit for this, and I know that we're going to pay a performance penalty for a long time if we did that. But gosh, it does provide orbital maintenance, keep alive power, people there, place to store the crew, mechanics if something goes wrong, and I think it's worth thinking about again.
Well, I was going to say, we're going to expand on the options and probably, try to make like Legos and break and reconnect a little bit next week. So I think that's one of the things we ought to keep in the hopper here. Hey, Jeff, I'm going to call for time because I know that we are ahead of schedule, behind schedule.
Okay, I'll be very quick.
Okay.
Okay. The other one I want to raise is that we talk a lot about cost, but I don't think it's been clear, not all costs are created equal. For the government in particular, a program with very high ongoing operations cost poses a real problem. And that problem is the budget's never constant. It goes up, it goes down. And they can't hold program reserves. It's a program problem we've heard from everybody. I can't hold on to enough reserves, OMB takes them away. Well, if your fixed costs are 25% of your cost, neither of these are that big of a deal. The budget goes up, I fly more missions. The budget goes down, I fly fewer missions. I have a program that slips out or overruns, I fly a few fewer missions. If it underruns, I fly more. But if your fixed costs are 50, 60, 70% of your budget, and your budget goes up or down by 25%, you're out of luck. And that is essentially the situation we find ourselves in. If we want a sustainable architecture, it's not enough to be cheaper. It has to be cheaper on a recurring cost basis, even if, ironically enough, it has to be cheaper on a fixed cost basis. Fixed cost has to be a lot cheaper. Even if, ironically enough, that means the marginal cost goes up a little bit in some optimized architecture where the budgets are perfectly flat and level and predictable. In the real world, you're better off.
I have a question for Jeff. Do you think time has come when we can start thinking of privately owned gas stations in space?
Yes, I think the time has come when we can start thinking about it. Whether the time has come where we're ready to start depending on it, we'll need more discussion.
Okay, at this point, Bo, I'm going to let you guys go off in the bar and continue that discussion. But our chair is famous for trying to have a little margin at the end of the day, and we've blown that. But I do want to, on his behalf and on behalf of the entire committee, thank all of our public participants today, those of you who spoke, as well as those of you who endured for several hours here in person and online. We really appreciate it. We are taking in all of the inputs and processing them as quickly as we can, but as you might imagine, we are going to be very focused on getting our report out by the end of August. So thank you all again, and travel safely.